So I can apply a name and hailing port properly to the back of this boat. I'm going to have to finish somewhat the preparation here of this panel here, which I started to rough up after removing the original vinyl letters. But I have some work to do before that. In particular, there are a lot of areas here where with the previous paint job, there's a lot of drips and runs and things in the paint, so all that has to be sanded smooth. And so I have areas like this where there's cracks. I'm gonna have to grind out those cracks, fill them with epoxy. And then of course areas like over here where there's cracks through the paint and the gel coat in this surface. So I'm gonna have to grind those out a little bit, fill them with epoxy. On the starboard side hull is where we find the worst damage. This occurred down in Chesapeake City, Maryland at a marina. When I was up against the gas dock, there was actually a semi-submerged piling that the hull was rubbing up against. To enlarge all the cracks that I need to address, I actually have this old X-Acto knife set that I've had since I was a kid. I'm missing one piece. I don't know where that is. I probably have it though. But anyway, these are intended for wood carving, but I think I'm going to use these to dig out the crack, give myself a wider, deeper crack that I can fill with the epoxy. Ignore all the spiders and dirt and other things if you can. And this is essentially how I'm going to work out these cracks. Just expose the deeper area. So that's kind of what we're going for. Open it up so there's a place to apply epoxy. Look at this one here. I started breaking away what I thought was a crack, and there's actually a void here behind the gel coat. So that's evidence of poor manufacturing. But I have to basically break all that out, open up that void completely, and fill it with epoxy. All the gouges and cracks that'll be filled with the epoxy quickly get wiped down with acetone, and then we sand the surface and the interior of the cracks. This is all to ensure that we have a clean surface to apply the epoxy to, but also a rough surface so that we get some decent tooth to it, so the epoxy really grabs a strong mechanical bond. So I've already gone around the boat and sanded out all the gouges and such, cleaned it, wiped it down with acetone, and I'm going to be filling all of these voids with a 2-part marine epoxy, PC11. This is nice to work with. It'll actually cure underwater if you need it to. It's very similar to Marine Tex, but a bit cheaper and a little bit thicker than what you would expect with Marine Tex. But anyway, it mixes nice. It's 50% Part A, 50% Part B. I'm going to be mixing it up with some plastic flatware. And I'll be mixing it up on this piece of laminate flooring that I have left over from my closet project. This is actually a plastic surface, so you don't want to generally mix this stuff up on cardboard. So I'll be using this as my surface, and then I'll be spreading it with these cheapo 2-inch plastic putty knives. I think that'll give me, they're a little bit flexible, so give me a nice spreading ability. So here's what it looks like. Part A is white, Part B is kind of bluish, greenish. And it's a 50% mix, so I scooped a little bit out with one knife, Part A with the other knife. Now I can actually stir these together until it's a uniform color. And that'll about do it. Just a word to the wise, if you're using this PC11 2-part epoxy filler as I am, it does not dry white. So you have to be prepared to ultimately do some finishing work. So I applied some in the past here when I had some left over from another project, and this is the color. It's kind of a light tan, yellow kind of color. So no big deal, as long as you plan on painting and doing finish work on top of it. This is what it looks like. Still need to sand that down. Still need to apply this to all the areas I've prepared. But just don't be expecting it to look like that, because it won't. You should probably use some sort of palette that's plastic. I didn't have any plastic lying around, but I did have a piece of scrap wood, so that's what I'm using right now. And then I'm just going to use a disposable putty knife. Grab some, and I'm going to spread it into my cracks that I've already widened. And the goal ultimately would be to try to get it fairly flat, but expect to do a little bit of sanding work when you're done. When this is all cured, obviously I'll go back and sand it, get a nice finish. And, you know, if I have to do a second pass, I'll do a second pass. No harm, no foul. Any deep or even wide areas that you're filling with epoxy, pretty much plan on applying it in layers. So apply it, sand it down, see what you end up with. You'll probably have some voids that'll require a second or even a third pass. And again, if I have to go back later and do a second pass after sanding, no big deal. Alright, well, this is the first layer. I could already see there's some deeper voids here that I'm going to have to go back with a second layer. But I'm going to let this cure, give it at least 24 hours, and I'll come back and I'll sand it all out. And if I need to do another layer, which I think I probably do at least to this one spot, I'll do that. So, old epoxy, new epoxy, it's all spread. We're going to let that cure, and in the morning I'll come back and I'll sand it all down smooth. Couple areas here to need some more filling. What's up, sanding girl?
Sanding.
So I have the hulls completely stripped of all sorts of stickers and adhesive, and I have epoxy all the gouges and things that I found along the way. There's still some more epoxy work to be done, but I'm going to sand the entire boat and prepare for priming. And I know that there'll be a little bit more epoxy work to be done before I prime, but that's where I'm at. First pass on the port side is done. And there's the starboard side. So, here's the transom, if you want to call it that. It's all sanded down, scuffed up, and ready for a few coats of paint.